This is Alexis Bach with NAMI Kane County North and another edition of our NAMI Cares podcast. Today, we are just going to be talking about it. What's it? It's mental illness. And with me is my guest and my friend, Lori Husky. Good morning, Lori. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm fine. Thank you. Always happy for this opportunity to enlighten the world, if we can, a little bit at a time about mental health.
And when we're doing that, I think the best place to start in our enlightenment process is right in our own home. So
Absolutely.
I'd like to start today just talking about, how we can help to cure the stigma and how we can help to kind of break through that barrier of fear and uncertainty about mental illness with our own families first. Because as you've said before, 1 in 5 people will suffer from mental illness at any point in their lives. And our family has a long history of mental illness. Cancer runs in some people's family. Well, mental illness runs in ours. And you can see this genetic or this component going down through the generations. And we've been pretty open about mental illness, but I know for some families, it's something that they just don't talk about.
Absolutely. I too come from a very large family, and there is a definite genetic component on my side of the family. And through the years, we discovered also on my husband's side. And when our 2 children that were diagnosed with mental illness were being treated, the psychiatrist told us, boy, your kid's got a double whammy here. The thing that really, really is important to me and families is that we are open about it and that we talk about it. Just because we have a genetic component doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Correct.
The susceptibility is there, and certain things can trigger it. But it's helpful if we know what kind of illnesses were prevalent through our family tree. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, for people in my parents' generation, everything was kept quiet. You didn't talk if somebody drank too much. You didn't talk if somebody had a mental illness. First of all, they weren't educated very well about it. They didn't have much information about it. And as recently as the 1970s, mothers were still being blamed for their children who developed schizophrenia. In my family, it was keep it quiet. That's family business. We don't share that.
I know I've experienced that too, because on my father's side of the family, there's a dark history there, mm-hmm. and nobody ever talked about it, and they're all gone now.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to know now what was going on that side of the family to be able to help my child who suffers from mental illness now.
Right. And I'm a grandma, so I like to think that my children are enlightened enough and my relatives are enlightened enough now that we'll prepare that generation so that they don't feel alone if something crops up, that we know that early treatment, early intervention works, that it's entirely possible to recover from a mental illness. But if we don't talk about it, that's the stigma that stops people from getting help.
Why don't people talk about mental illness? Why in our own families, the people that we love the most and the people that we're the closest to, it just seems like that's a subject that's still completely taboo. How can we?
Shame. And
yep.
I know in my father's generation, and I've talked to even cousins of mine, because these illnesses are just running through all of the family, I've discovered. Our fathers were of a generation that thought the way to handle any kind of difficulty was pull up your bootstraps, get mm-hmm. a job, get it done.
Yes.
Put this behind you. I know now that my own father probably suffered post-traumatic stress disorder from his experiences in World War II.
Oh.
We didn't know what those mm-hmm. behaviors were. We didn't know that his drinking probably had something mm-hmm. to do with that. But now we know those things. And we know that trauma, whether And trauma doesn't have to always be something like sex abuse or physical assault. Trauma is anything that affects your brain to the point that you can't function correctly or normally anymore. And it can be a loss of a loved one. It can be a loss of a job that you thought you were going to have forever. It can be an accident, a car accident. Any of those things are a trauma to our brain. And if we're susceptible to some of these illnesses, it might be a trigger.
Just saying how trauma can be a trigger. One thing that I've learned through NAMI, which was very eye-opening through your family course, is that trauma is so individualized. So what may have been traumatic to me as a child would not affect someone else. But then again, there's another thing that would deeply affect me, and it's so individual, and you just don't know.
It absolutely is. And that's why being judgmental is so hurtful and stigmatizing. I really, really encourage my family members to talk about our illnesses. When my son died 7 years ago, of course, as parents, we were dealing with our own grief. Our daughters were dealing with sibling grief. And I had very little energy to be comforting and help them through those kinds of things. Thankfully, they were educated enough to know where to get some help. But we are a family that talks about it now. I found that when our son first became ill, I really looked to my 6 siblings for support, and some were unable to do that, not because they were blaming or angry, but because of their own self-stigma about something they're dealing with, or the perception that there's a failure somewhere in parenting skills or a societal failure. Thankfully now we all talk about it a little more openly. And thankfully I have nieces and nephews that have been very open and frank with each other. Because, science tells us now if a medication works for one family member very well who might have been diagnosed with bipolar, depending on whether it's bipolar 1 or 2, perhaps that medication will work as well for an extended family member just because of the genetics involved. I was recently asked for all the medication reviews for my daughter and my son to help a nephew. And thankfully, we have that information. We have science. Another thing that really prevents people from talking about it is pill shaming. That's kind of a simplistic term. There are many people that believe medications are not the answer, that diet, exercise, those things are more important.
I agree that exercise and a good diet is definitely important. It's a strong component to how you feel. And I even agree even more with the biological or the genetic element, because I have noticed that medications that I have had to take on and off during my life, I struggle with anxiety and depression, those have been used with other family members and they have responded positively. So for instance, Prozac is one that one of my other family members responded very well to.
Absolutely. And that knowledge comes from us having a comfortable conversation about it. There are also people that won't talk about it because perhaps their religion, their faith, their cultural background tells them that this could be prayed away. And I hear that often. And I'm here to tell you, I believe in the power of prayer. I've had it answered, but it is not the only answer. And for people to recover from an illness, like mental illness, there are lots of components: medications, exercise, a social life. We need sociability, a faith in something, and good nutrition. Those are just all very basic needs.
So as we're sitting down with our families,
Mm-hmm.
what is a good way to open the conversation? Because I have noticed that the younger generation is very, very open. They're very open to talking about mental illness. They're very open to telling their own story.
That makes my heart swell.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but how can we open that conversation with other people in our family who may not be so open, or who may feel that shame that that they've done something wrong, or it's something to be hidden?
There's always an opportunity. There's always a little window when certain phrases are used, or somebody brings up the topic of a family member. And that's your opportunity to say, I'm glad you brought that up. I want to tell you what I know about that. Here's what our family history has taught me about that.
I find that sharing your own experience is a good way to have someone else open up, because it's your experience. So they
Right.
can't argue with that, but somewhere along the line, you may touch on something that person is also feeling, which will give them a sense of
Right.
relief that maybe they can open up and talk to you
Right.
about what's going on with them.
I found that when I went back to work after our son died, it was hard for me to focus, but I certainly did, because it was also a respite from my grief. But I also talked about it. I really vowed that I wanted to talk about it in a non-aggressive way to everybody I worked with.
Mm-hmm.
And when I retired, one of the other employees came up to me and she said, I just want to thank you for sharing that through the years with us. And she said, I'm ready now to tell people that I had a suicide attempt at one point in my life. Thankfully, she was able to get help. So just by sharing my own experience, not asking anybody else for theirs, just sharing what we were going through as a family, gave her permission to say, me too. I don't want people to ever feel alone. That's the worst. That is just the worst feeling.
So while we're talking about it, meaning mental illness, we've got to identify this. I really feel like, what is it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, our aunt's drinking? Was it, father was abusive?
Mm-hmm.
Was mom just kind of seemed like she was really happy one day and then super, super sad the next day?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever those symptoms may be in a family, is just talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on? What can I help you with?
Right.
I think those are good ways to open conversations with people who suffer from the mental illness. And then there's also the people on the other side who are the ones who are trying to help this person.
And what I hear most of all from people who are in a bad spot, maybe today or this week, is they don't want advice. They didn't ask you for advice. And it makes you feel better that you've offered something, even if it's ill-conceived. But just be there. Just say, I'm here for you. I'm here for you.
So listening is so important. I found that a lot of people in my life, they just want to be heard. And even the smallest advice that you may give, well, why can't they just get over it? Or we'll just go and, I found in my life that listening is really what people need. And to avoid any type of comments or telling them what to do, it's always well-meaning. You're always, why don't you do this? Or why don't you do that? Or, well, you can just, just put on a brave face in the morning and go out to face your day. I found that's not helpful at all. And just learning to be a good listener, learning to say, I understand, or learning to say, I felt that too. And just affirmation. That is a big thing to help people.
And validation.
Yes.
That your story, I believe you. I believe you. I heard somewhere there was a saying that we generally listen to respond, not to hear.
Yes.
And people, as you say, want to be heard. They want to know that what they what they perceive is their reality, and that you accept that. I may not accept that behavior or such and such a thing actually truly happened, but I accept that is her or his reality of it. And to just be a hugger, and I don't mean just touch, but with your words, with your face, with everything.
So I'm glad we had a chance today to sit and talk about it. Again, the it being mental illness.
And to remember that everyone is trying their darndest. They are my absolute heroes to get up every day and try those medications. And please believe me, medications are so important in most cases, and that they face each day with that struggle. And if we can let them know we're here for them.
Being there for them is a great way to open the conversation and talk about it.
It absolutely is, and it can start right in your home.
Well, thank you, Lori, for being with me today.
Thank you for having us.
And have a great day.
Thank you.